Kia ora. Hello. Harimai, welcome to this video. The last video I did was called My Journey with Music. I wish to apologise, first of all, how it ended abruptly. And I need to clear up something here, is that it was my fault because I ran out of space on my iPhone that I'm recording this on. But this shouldn't happen today. I've got plenty of space, and this won't be too long a video, I hope, because I may end up doing this in 3 parts. So part of the problem I'm having also is that I not only don't really know how to edit properly, but I also I'm unable to edit on my iMac just behind me. I recently tried to fire up iMovie, but it appears that I've got the version 10.2.3 and I need 10.4.2 to make it, to be able to use it on my iMac, because it's outdated. But unfortunately, because my my Mac has been updated to the closest it can be, it's already 9 years old, so it can't be updated to the latest version, which I'm not sure what that is, 13, 14 or 15. I can't unless I can't even go back and use my old one as it was, because my my software is too far updated, even though it can't be updated to the latest, if that makes any sense. For you Mac or computer people may understand that. So that's on hold. And also the person that was going to come and show me how to edit properly, I should be able to teach myself, but I just haven't, and I haven't had time and haven't got around to it, is busy at the moment, so that won't be happening for a while. So just bear with me. You're going to get a lot of unedited videos, but that's good. It's fresh and in the moment. I have made some notes for this video, which incidentally is going to be my journey to with music part 3. You may have seen my earlier one, which was that ended abruptly, which was Journey to Music part 1. So this is part 2. Sorry, did I say part 3? Already losing it. But anyway, I ended somewhere around 1970, 71, where I was talking about my brother's record club that he used to belong to. I think it was called the World Record Club, I'm not sure, where they used to post out records to him once a month. And if you didn't let them know that you didn't want it, then you would have stuck with it all well. So anyway, he got a couple of albums, Jimi Hendrix albums. I can't remember exactly what year this was. It might be 71, it could be 72, not quite sure. But, or could have been earlier. It could have been as early as 1970 even. But he got, first of all, Jimi Hendrix's smash hits, which I loved, and also later on Jimi Hendrix's Band of Gypsys, the live one, which I loved. He played that over and over, more so perhaps than the smash hits. And so I kept hearing it from his bedroom. He'd be playing it loud, and sometimes I'd go in there and listen to it with him. So I really became a full-on Hendrix fanatic. And he had a big influence on my music right through to this day. In fact, even though sadly he passed away in 1970, he only really had 3 years where he was around recording his own stuff, and a minimal albums that he had control over. I think only the first 3 before he died. Everything else has been released since his death. So anyway, yeah, just wanted to mention that. So as I'd mentioned in the earlier one, there were bands like Led Zeppelin and now Hendrix and Deep Purple, and I was tending towards that rockier, heavy rock stuff. I did start when I left school and started working, how old was I? Was I 16, 17? You could leave school at 16. Is that still the age? I'm not sure. Back then, I started profusely buying albums. Pretty much every week, I would. I had a job in a retail store. I wasn't earning a lot of money, but I think albums were about $4 then, which might sound ridiculously cheap, vinyls, but that was still a fair chunk out. I can't remember what my wages were back then. It was still a fair chunk out of your wages, but I always made sure I had enough. And once a week, when I got paid, I would go and buy an album. Now, the first album that I ever bought was a Black Sabbath, the English heavy rockers, and some say the pioneers of heavy rock. Of course, that's very debatable, but they had a distinct heavy sound. And the first album I bought of theirs was Paranoid, which is actually their second album. Well, I became obsessed by Black Sabbath. Once I heard them, I had posters on the wall. I had Hendrix posters as well. But I was really into this band, Black Sabbath. I just became so obsessed by them that I then went out and bought their first self-titled album, just Black Sabbath. And then later the one that came after Paranoid, which was Masters of Reality. And then I went on to buy Black Sabbath Volume 4. After that, I can't remember what year that came out. Was it about 72, 73, Volume 4? After that, I sort of lost interest in Black Sabbath a bit after that. But anyway, let's go from that time, as much as I can tell you, between say 71, 72, right through to about 77, if I can do that. And I'm probably going to end up doing a part 3. I don't know how many parts there's going to be to this, of my journey with music as yet, because I do tend to go off track a bit and go into detail and stuff, but that's just what I like doing. That's my passion. So I'm going to try and cover the period in this one from around 71, 72 right through to about 77. And before I moved out of Auckland and moved to Wellington. And I think that will pick up with perhaps my part 3 where I was a whole different ball game of music that I was exposed to and got into then. So anyway, as I say, I was still listening around this time. I bought my first Black Sabbath album, and some of my friends were buying albums, and they were buying stuff like Emerson, Lake and Palmer, who I didn't know much about. Although actually my brother, I did. My brother had bought their first album. Not Emerson, Lake and Palmer. King Crimson is the band I meant to mention here. My friends were buying Emerson, Lake and Palmer. My brother had gone out and bought King Crimson. And these are, for those of you who don't know, these are progressive rock bands from England, who back then, I don't know even if the term progressive rock was used as a term. So some of most of it really originated in England. In fact, it did really. So, bands like King Crimson and Emerson, Lake and Palmer, who fell into that category. It had an English flavour to it, sometimes folky or English myths and wizards and Lord of the Rings type stuff. And so I was getting into that as well. But I was still full on Black Sabbath, and Led Zeppelin and Hendrix were my real go-to, as well as the local bands that I'd seen, which were, I don't know if I've mentioned, I saw a band called Space Farm. I did mention that I'd gone, they were a local Auckland band. I mentioned that in the previous video, that me and my friend Peter, we used to go out when we were 15, 16 and go to nightclubs around Auckland, because nightclubs weren't licensed then, so you didn't have to be 18 to get in, right? So yeah, people used to smuggle alcohol in, and if you're in the know, you could buy it in there legally if you're in the know. But it was you weren't allowed alcohol. They weren't licensed back in those days, so it was no problem getting in if you're a bit younger. So anyway, a few times we went down to this nightclub in Auckland called Tabla, and we saw a band called Space Farm. Now, these guys were something else. I had never seen anything quite like this. When I saw them, they'd actually shaven all their hair off. Prior to that, they all had pretty long hair, except for Harvey Mann, who had shorter curly hair, but still long for those days. He's a guitarist. And they played this most incredible music to me, which sounded like the nearest I could think was kind of the later Jimi Hendrix music, like off Cry of Love, which was he started recording before he died, where that was going. It had kind of sounds like that, but it had its own thing. It was just a 3-piece. And I was just totally fascinated by this, and to see it live, I couldn't believe the energy and that these guys came up with. And back then, after they'd shave their heads, sometimes I'd see them and they have matching bright tops on, and so their name fitted how they looked. They looked like with their head shaved. Back then, people never shaved their heads, women or men. It was unheard of, and it was and skinheads hadn't existed then, coming in like with the punk thing or that, or other celebrities like Grace Jones, who later didn't shave her head but shaved it very short. These were some of the first people to start doing stuff like that. It was unheard of. It, so they really did look alien, or like from out in space. So that was intriguing, and I saw other bands there like Little John, who would later go on to be all members of Bluter. I saw an early incarnation of Dragon at the same place at the Tabla, and they were called Anti-Pot. And just so you know, that was spelled Anteapot, one word, Anti-Pot. An early incarnation of them, who were very interesting, and probably back in their early days almost sounded a bit more progressive rocky. If you listen to their first album, it's quite removed from what they were to go on and do later with all their singles. It's definitely, they had the keyboardist, I think his name's Ivan Thompson, who did a lot of far out keyboard stuff, almost like the guys in English bands like Yes, like Rick Wakeman and that. And so they had more of a prog rock sound to their music. They were varied. They did other stuff, but before they became a more contextualized rock, and I guess you could say later on pop band. So the early lineup of them as Anti-Pot was an interesting band. All very different bands, and the same with Little John, who also, I might add, Bruno Lawrence was a member of at one stage. I can't remember though if he was the drummer. I know he left later on at the time, because I wasn't familiar with all the names, but the band I see had Corbin Simpson in it, him and two of the Little John brothers who were in that band, Tony Littlejohn, I can't remember the other one's name. They later went on to be members of Bluter after Bruno Lawrence had left to be Bluter. So anyway, that Corbin Simpson, when I saw them, was playing bass and doing a lot of vocals in that band. So that was interesting. So they were opening my mind to local music that was really different from what I'd been exposed. That was a really interesting period. Somewhere along the line, I think it was 1972, I went to a concert at Carlisle Park, which was a rugby league park then, which was never heard of as holding concerts. In fact, this may have been the first. But Daddy Cool, who were a band from Australia, came here, and you may know them with their famous single, occasionally it pops up on classic radios that play old classic hits. Eagle Rock, you may know that song. Well, they came here and they toured here, and they on this gig I saw them with at Carlaw Park, so it was outdoors, a rugby league park. They had the band Ticket, who are a rock band from Christchurch. So Ticket played before them. Well, Ticket just blew me away, especially the guitarist Eddie Hansen. I was just, wow. Other than Harvey Mann from Space Farm and Billy TK, this is Billy TK Sr., not Billy TK Jr., Billy TK Sr.'s band Human Instinct, I had never seen a guitarist quite like this. Again, sort of Hendrix influenced, but they had their own thing going on as well. Quite amazing. So I was just blown away by Ticket. Daddy Cool were all right. They were a fun band, but musically not as seriously mind-blowing to me as, say, Ticket were. So that I was really drawn into Ticket's sound. And then later on, sometime around the same year, I saw a concert. I'm not sure if this is 72 or 73. I saw a concert at, I think it was Auckland University, and it was Space Farm. I'm pretty sure Ticket were on the same gig. But I can't, or if I saw them separately at another gig so they used to have a lot of, and they still do now, university campus. When it was about to start, they used to have a lot of the bands used to come around then, and I'm pretty sure I saw Ticket either at that same gig or another time, and that was incredible. That was the first time for me that I'd really listened to drums. And Glenn Absalom with Space Farm, also known as Glenny Pig, he was doing this stuff on drums, and I couldn't believe it. I was like, my God, is that one guy? I was a little way back from the stage and I couldn't quite see, but I'd seen them before, and I thought, God, is there a percussionist there or what? Sounds like about 3 drummers. How could he be doing all that? Because honestly, what he was doing created the illusion that there was more than one person playing the drums. There was a lot of different beats and things going on, and I was like totally blown away by his drumming. Never seen anything like it. Anyway, these local bands became a huge influence on me, and then eventually my brother had the album, and I brought my own copy of Space Farm, and then I bought Ticket's album, their first one, Awake, as well, and I would play these albums over and over again, as well as my Black Sabbath album. And I also had I bought a later album in fact 2 albums by Human Instinct. My brother had Stone Guitar, which was the second album, and he had the first one, which was called Burning Up Years. Stone Guitar I really liked, the title track Stone Guitar. That's just out there. Not a very good recording. The drums sound a bit tinny on that, but incredible music. And then I bought their third album called Pins in It, right? I thrashed that album. These are the albums I thrashed around that time. It was Human Instinct's Pins in It, Space Farm, self-titled album, came out in 1972, and Human Instinct's Pins in It. I'd play air guitar along with them. I'd grab a tennis racket, and my brother used to play tennis, and I'd grab his tennis racket and play air guitar on it while listening to these crazy, this amazing music. And I'd even do the same with Black Sabbath, especially the Paranoid album, which I loved. And I later saw Black Sabbath at the Great Narrawahia Music Festival, which was over 3 days. I managed to go to that. and see them, and I got up quite close to the stage, and that was another incredible moment of live music. Now, around going on a bit further to 1973. Now, 1973 became a pivotal kind of year for me in how I heard music and how I listened to it. And I got exposed to so much more music. And also around that time, I was 17 and I'd left home. I was doing some crazier things. I took some illicit substances back then. And some of which, were a bit scary, and some were okay, and some put me to sleep. But some of those things that I got involved in way back then, some of them really seemed to increased my sensories and my awareness, and I found a new way of listening to music through these mind-altering state substances. And I can remember listening specifically to Jimi Hendrix's Electric Ladyland, hearing the Voodoo Child track, and I was like, oh my God, I've never heard this like this before. Somehow, some of these things that I was taking at the time somehow seemed to open my senses and expanded them so that I was able to hear little intricate things in the music that I'd never noticed before, and the way it flowed and came together in a totally different way. It really opened me up to hearing stuff in music that I had never even noticed, all the subtleties, all the nuances. And so this opened my mind to a whole different way of looking at music. I was never the same after that year. Even though I didn't, keep on doing all these crazy things or taking these substances, it had opened a gate for me that had made me hear music differently, and there was no going back. And Jimi Hendrix was a big one, and so were Pink Floyd. Hearing Dark Side of the Moon, I was like, oh my God, this is a whole nother dimension to music. So that was good. And from then on in, I was able, even without substances, I was able to hear music in a different way that I'd never heard before. And so it opened my scope to listening to all sorts of music, from folk to blues to jazz to all sorts. But I still a lot of the music that I was kind of still drawn towards was the rock-based stuff that was sort of expanding out into other areas, whether it be progressive rock or some that even seemed to have elements of jazz. And this led me to, I heard an album by Santana, right? Caravanserai. Now, that was life-changing for me because that album, and I'd been a big Santana fan from their early stuff. My brother had their early albums, Abraxas, and their self-titled album. And so one of the bands he was in used to play some of their songs. But this Caravanserai was totally different. And it was kind of jazzy. There was more instrumental stuff, more long tracks on it. This started taking me in a different direction. And I went out and bought this album, which had Santana did an album. He crossed over to becoming into a spiritual life. Like he renounced taking drugs and all those things, and he became involved in this movement called Sri Shimnoi, which was named after their guru, where they meditated, and wore white and all this sort of stuff, shaved their hair shorter. And he did an album with a guy called John McLaughlin, who at this stage, an English guitarist I didn't know much about, called Love, Devotion, Surrender. Wow. Now, so this is where music for me crossed over into what became and what I then later on perceived as jazz rock, or some people called it jazz fusion. This was at the time when this music really started taking off. There was stuff around before then that I hadn't heard, but this is where it came into its own around 73, 74, and went on to its peak period, possibly up to the late 70s before it changed completely. So I just love this music, and it seemed like this was, after being so into Cry of Love, the album that was put out after Hendrix died, but he recorded a lot of it before he died, with the hope, intention of putting it out on an album. It seemed to me like this could have been where Hendrix was going, somewhere along a mixture of this and some of the progressive rock stuff that was around, like Emerson, Lake and Palmer. It seemed like he was going, and this seemed to be where the progressiveness of rock, which I loved more than anything, seemed to be going. But this stuff here, fusion, was taking me also into jazz more. So and then I, around 1977, I think it was, earlier than that, 76. I had a job in a dairy factory in Auckland, and I met this amazing guy called Ivan Kitson. If you're watching, Ivan, hi out there, he's still around. Haven't seen him for years. Love to catch up. He invited me to his house with our mutual interest in music. And when I got there, Ivan had this huge, massive vinyl collection. Gosh, he must have had 1,000 or so albums at least back then. And a lot of it was jazz fusion, which I'd started getting into. But it was a lot of jazz fusion I'd never heard of. And then mixed in with that was just a lot of jazz. And this really opened me up through listening both to this music and looking at Ivan's record collection to a lot of jazz. And I could see where a lot of these fusion guys, and some of them were rock guys that had crossed over into jazz, but there was a lot of guys that came from the jazz scene, like John McLaughlin and like a lot of the American guys, Herbie Hancock, the Weather Report guys, Joe Zawin and all that, Return to Forever. And so I just immersed myself in this stuff, a lot of the stuff that I got exposed to thanks to Ivan, and stuff I just started. I was an avid album cover reader. I would read it from cover to cover. I would read all the musicians, and I'd read all the magazines. I'd get Rolling Stone, I'd get Melody Maker, I'd get New Musical Express, and our local one, which had started around then, Rip It Up. There was also one called Real Groove, which existed for a while, a local one. So I would read these so I was building up quite a knowledge of music that was out there, and I was getting to know people from reading the covers. And then I would get magazines like, I started to get the Downbeat, which is kind of a contemporary magazine that's more jazz-based, but it has like fusion and other world music and stuff like that, and started reading them. And I started reading interviews with musicians, and then I got into Guitar Player and bought that, and later Bass Player, and then later what was the other one I was thinking of? Is it Drummer's World? No, not Drummer's World. Yeah, no, it might be Drummer's World, the main big drumming magazine that's still around now. Is it Drummer's World? And I just loved reading the interview. Then I would read stuff, and that's how I'd find out about other stuff. I'd read interviews with, there's no internet back then. I'd read interviews with musicians, and especially in these drummers and guitar magazines, and they'd talk about who influenced them, and then they'd name albums that they loved, And so I'd go and seek out these albums, and I'd get more into more other fusion. I'd get more into jazz. I started buying John Coltrane albums and listening to more jazz, older jazz as well. And so this opened up my whole world to jazz and other musics. And actually through fusion, I started to hear funky stuff via people like Stanley Clarke. And although I wasn't listening to a lot of more pure funk stuff like James Brown, this came later on, I was listening to funk via these fusion guys like Stanley Clarke and bass players like that. So I was starting to get drawn into that funky sound, and I loved it. So then, yeah, so my interests in music was still primarily rock, but then it became fusion, but then it became also a lot of jazz, and I was starting to get into a little bit of electronic music. I love Tangerine Dream. So I was, and then I was starting to get into a bit of folk or folk rock crossover, like Joni Mitchell, who I happened to see in Auckland. I think it was, oh God, what year was that? Like 1976. I sat right behind the band, right behind. She had Vinnie Colaiuta on drums then, and her husband Larry Klein playing bass. I was virtually behind the drummer. Auckland Town Hall back then, you could sit. They had seating behind, and for some gigs, I don't think they do that now. They had some seating behind the band. Pretty amazing. Yeah, I also saw Frank Zappa live there in Auckland Town Hall in 1975. Oh my God, that was incredible. Terry Bozzio on drums, out of this world, one of the best drummers. And I have to say that back then I did go to a lot of concerts, too numerous to mention. And I think I'll do a separate video going through. I'll try and trace back through all the live, or a lot of the live acts I've seen. Maybe I'll do a separate one on overseas bands and do ones on local bands. I don't know. I'll figure that out later. So yeah, opened up to a lot of different music back then. It wasn't till later on, and I was also I was exposed to a bit of soul and funk. I went to a friend of a friend's place with a friend of mine. This was in around 74. And this guy, his name's Barry Gemmell. I don't know if he's still around. I haven't heard of him. This Maori guy I met through a friend back then. He had, hello Barry, if you're still out there. We went to his place and started listening to some music, and he had this album by Rufus, and I think it's their debut album just called Rufus. I know it's called Rags to Rufus, right? Well, I heard, but he not only had that, he had the follow-up, Rufusized. So he was playing these albums over and over, and I was just blown away by this real groovy, soulful, funky sound in this woman's voice, Chaka Khan. Oh my God, what a singer. So I was exposed to a bit of soul and funk then, or old school R&B, call it what you like, and it's rocky as well, and I just love that. I ended up getting that Rags to Rufus album, and later on the Rufusized one. I've been a big Chaka Khan fan ever since, still am. So, but other than that, and the stuff, the funk coming through from the fusion guys like Stanley Clarke, Jaco Pastorius, I hadn't really gone into funk deeply. That came a bit later. And also, I must say that before, and what later on, somewhere along the line, I was at another friend's place. I don't know what year this was. This must have been in the 70s, maybe 76, where I heard Miles Davis for the first time, and it was the tribute to Jack Johnson album, which John McLaughlin played on, and Herbie Hancock. There's only, wow, it was being played. I was visiting a friend, and one of his flatmates was playing it in his bedroom down the hallway, and I could hear this, and I was going, my God, what is that? I'd never heard anything quite like that. Although I'd started getting into fusion, I never heard anything quite like that. So that was my early exposure to Miles Davis, who I later became a big, big fan of. And to this day, him and Jimi Hendrix are probably my two biggest influences as musicians, people and their music. They're both well past now, especially Jimmy, in my life, and they've had a profound effect on me musically. But also I want to add, I'll backtrack a bit here about this, how I got into fusion. After I had this, I digress, this Love, Devotion, Surrender album, I went out, and once I found out about John McLaughlin, I went out and bought an album of his band Mahavishnu Orchestra, the first lineup, and it was the live album called Between Nothingness and Eternity. Well, I bought that album and I fell in love with it. Again, this was one of my early exposures to fusion, although I didn't quite know that the category was called that back then. All I knew was, man, this is really different, right? And I was just totally blown away by that music. I'd never heard anything like it. And incidentally, Kiwi in the band back then, Rick Laird, he played bass on the early Mahavishnu Orchestra lineup, the first lineup. So that just really set me on the pathway, and I started buying albums. I got into Return to Forever and Weather Report. I was a big Return to Forever fan, and especially after hearing Romantic Warrior, that album is just out of this world, one of the best fusion albums. I think, fusion later on became what a guy I listened to quite a bit on YouTube, and shout out to Andy Edwards for inspiring me a bit with this channel. What he called Fusac, or I used to say in the late, fusion when it first came out, it had a danger to it and an edge and a lot of improv in it. But as time went on and the record labels kind of started demanding more commercial stuff from it, it became what I called shopping mall music. Andy Edwards and some other people call it Fusac. In other words, it became a real tame version of what jazz fusion was in its prime. For me, in its prime, jazz fusion in its heyday would be like probably from 1970, 71, around there, through to, I'd almost say maybe 77. Some might go, maybe a little bit later, maybe 78, 79. But definitely by the end of the 80s, it had kind of, a lot of the Main Street fusion artists, some of them anyway, had gone into playing more smooth jazz, or Fusac, as some people call it. It was a bit of a shame, but there were still others doing it under the radar, and there were bands like Brand X, who were one of the few English fusion bands who I think were up there with all the American. It seemed, I guess, because jazz was more came out of America, and when jazz fusion became popular, a lot of the main bands were American, like Return to Forever, Mahavishnu Orchestra, although John McLaughlin was English, and Weather Report and bands like that. But Brand X was up there. They were up there as far as I'm concerned. But unfortunately, a lot of people don't know this, but Phil Collins was their original drummer. And if you don't think Phil Collins is a great drummer, because you've only heard what you've heard on hits, or maybe you've listened to a better Genesis, go and get Brand X's first album, Unorthodox Behaviour, and have a listen. I mean, it still sounds amazing now. That was 1977 that came out. I think I heard that album and bought it at the same time that I bought Visions in the Emerald Beyond by Mahavishnu Orchestra, the second incarnation, and I bought Brand X's album. I think I bought those two at the same time. I remember being in, what was the name of that music store in Auckland? It was on, they moved quite a bit. Was it Taste Music? No, not Taste. God, that was in Wellington. I can't remember the name of it, but they moved several times. In the early days, they actually had little booths that you went inside, which is also on High Street. Then moved to another spot. So then you sat down. They had a little couch area where you could sit down, and I think they put the record on for you, or did you? Yeah, I think they did. And then you sat down with this couch and the headphones. When I heard both those albums, they were both life-changing moments for me, even though I heard Mahavishnu before. The new one with a new lineup, I love them even more. Sorry, Die Hard original lineup fans, but that's the truth. And then I got to see them, that lineup in Auckland. I could never be the same again after that. Anyway, I'm dragging on a bit here and backtracking. So you might be able to see. I'm telling you all this. So when you do eventually, when I get to other music stuff that I'm gonna, I don't know about reviewing, or that I'm only gonna review stuff I like, and I'm only gonna talk about stuff I like. I can't see the point, as I've said it. I think I said it in one of my earlier videos, critiquing music. But I'm just wanting you to know my journey with music, and for you to know that I'm judging music as a listener and enjoying it as a listener, not a musician, right? So if you're here to hear stuff about what chords they're playing and all that stuff, I'm not the guy. You'll have to find it on another channel like Rick Beato or even Andy Edwards or whoever. Other channels that can give you the lowdown on that. But I want to give it from a listener's perspective, and I think that's quite interesting. I don't know how many other YouTube music channel people are actually musicians. Quite a few of them are or have been, but I'm not one of those. But I have, I'll just say this, and I'll kind of delve into that a bit in my part 3. I have attempted at various times to learn musical instruments, but not got far with it. And I have been and around and even jammed with bands in a sense. But we'll talk about that in my part 3, because that came a lot later on. I was exposed to my brother's bands, but I would sometimes sit in on their rehearsals and then watch one of them. I used to watch their gigs a bit, but we'll talk about that then. I'm running out of time here, so unfortunately I did digress a lot, but I'm telling you all this so when I do come to talk about other stuff, if you've at least bothered to watch this or the video before it, you'll get an idea of where I'm coming from in terms of what I experienced with music and what I know or don't know about music. so you can get a better understanding of where I'm coming from in terms of when I do start to actually talk about music. And I hope I want to talk about music I've discovered, and not just all this older stuff, newer stuff that I've been getting into. So just so you know where I'm coming from, and have a better understanding of where I'm at. It's good to know a person's background before you jump in and think, well, why are they saying this and why are they not saying that? So, yeah, that's going to be me for now. I did want this to be a lot shorter, and I did want to cover a bit more, but I haven't. So I'm just going to leave it there. So thanks for tuning in. Thanks for watching this if you got this far. If you like what you've seen and want to watch more of this or what I might do later, then please give me a like, or if you feel like subscribing, doesn't cost you anything. No money involved. And I will see you on the next video, which hopefully will be my journey with music, part 3. This is Noel signing out. Have an awesome day. Bye-bye.